Good evening. You join me at the end of a long day organising a sustainability festival, but it's the 30th of June and so it's time to do my second quarterly wrap up. I don't have any of my physical books here this time because I'm house sitting, so I'm at somebody else's house with their books and their animals. Quarter two, so it covers April, May and June, during which I read a total of 27 books, mostly in April. That's not surprising because April has Dewey's readathon, 24-hour readathon, so I get through quite a few books during that time. I also vlogged the readathon, so you can click and view that video if you'd like. I read mostly graphic novels during that day, so that's why I got through so many in only 24 hours. So let's make me small and look over the information. So April was 15 books total. Last quarter I didn't tell you the titles of the books as I was going because I figured you could just see them on the screen, but that might not have been the most helpful, particularly for people who've got the screen turned off or, you know, just don't have great vision because they can't see the tiny book covers. So I'll try and very briefly tell you what I read each month. So April started off with Kundo Wakes Up. That is the sequel to The Gurkha and the Lord of Tuesday. It wasn't quite as good as that, but I still really enjoyed it. So again, it's set in a future where cities are controlled by an AI. In this city, the AI has started to crumble and go a bit strange, so it doesn't quite have control of the systems, the environmental systems, the flood defences, and so the city is kind of falling down. And this story follows an artist called Kundo whose wife goes missing, and so he has to figure out what's happened to her and actually leave his apartment and go out into the city and figure out what the hell's going on. Next up was Fool's Fate. So this is the final book in the Tawny Man trilogy. I always loved Robin Hobbs. Can't tell you much about it since it's the end of a trilogy, but the trilogy as a whole is dealing with the fallout from the Red Ship War and royal marriages and dragon hunting. That's all I can say. Then I read Why Fish Don't Exist. This is a non-fiction kind of half biography and then half just about fishes and how there's no such thing as a cohesive classification of a fish, and actually there's so much diversity within fish that they can be as different as you know, mammals. Just because an elephant and a giraffe both live in the savannah doesn't mean that they are the same, in the same way that we refer to fish as a general grouping. Then I read And Put Away Childish Things. This is the latest installment from Adrian Tchaikovsky's novella series. They're called Terrible Worlds, or Terrible Destinations and Terrible Revolutions. This is one of the terrible destinations. It's about a man whose grandmother wrote a series of very popular children's books dealing with like a fantasy land, Narnia-esque, and he one day gets approached outside his house by one of the characters from this fantasy land, and then things get bonkers. Then we get into the books I read during the readathon. So there's The Incredible Nellie Bly, which is a graphic novel biography about the investigative journalist Nellie Bly and her groundbreaking work, particularly her journey around the world. Then Everything Is Fine, which is kind of a horror sci-fi about people living in a weird Stepford Wives kind of situation. Then we've got Suzanne, which is about a French tennis star during the kind of jazz age. Then one of the installments of the Firefly graphic novels, this one's called River Run because the leading story is about how Simon rescued River. Then there was Sandman Overture. So this is the bind up of all the comics. It's a prequel to the Sandman graphic novel series, so it's about the events which meant that Dream was very depleted of energy and so was able to be captured by the events at the beginning of the main Sandman graphic novel series. Then during that time I was also listening to an audiobook. So it's Agatha Christie's N or M, which is a Tommy and Tuppence installment dealing with them trying to find Nazi spies hiding in the English seaside town. Then the next few of these titles are all audiobooks because I did my week of audiobooks only. Again, you can click above somewhere and see a video all about it. So I started off with The Maltese Falcon, classic crime noir, Crazy Dames, Gumshoe Detective, Bad Guys. Then there was the next installment in the Brother Cadfael series. This was called An Excellent Mystery. The mystery was about a nun who didn't turn up at the monastery she was supposed to. And meanwhile in Shrewsbury, some monks from Winchester, the city got badly damaged and burnt, and so they travelled to Shrewsbury to relocate. Then I listened to The Cloisters, a dark academia concerning divination and tarot and art history and fate, ideas like that. And then I finished off that week with Thornhedge, which is a fairy tale retelling, so Sleeping Beauty retold from the point of view of the person who made Sleeping Beauty fall asleep and brought that curse on the castle. And I ended the month by reading and listening to Death on the Lusitania. This is a debut novel from a writing duo, and one of them passed away after the book was written. So there will never be another book written by this pen name. Interesting and sad, but it's a historical fiction murder mystery. The Lusitania was a famous ship that travelled from New York to, I think it was going to Liverpool, but it had to go via Ireland first. I won't tell you what happened to it, although maybe you know because it is common knowledge, but this book follows a murder that happened mid-journey. So our main detective character is trying to figure things out in a classic murder mystery, but we as the reader know that things are going to happen to the Lusitania, and it's ominously lurking in the background. So that was April. Into May, quite the contrast. Only 2 books in May. We were in Japan for 18 days, so I didn't get much reading done at all. I did listen to The Village of Eight Graves whilst I was there, because I was trying to listen to a murder mystery set in a country I was visiting. That's just what I like to do. Not my favourite of the Detective Kindaichi series, unfortunately, mostly because it didn't actually have much of Kindaichi in it. It's told from the point of view of the protagonist who survived everything that happened, and now he's elsewhere looking back on his time when he was in the Village of Eight Graves and writing out his experience and the investigation he did and what happened and how it all played out. So he didn't overlap with the police all that much because he was kind of off doing his own thing, taking matters into his own hands. So that's why Kindaichi's not in it very much. I finished that off once I got back home by reading the physical book. It's so weird that it took me 3 weeks to get 50% of the way through whilst we were on holiday, and then I finished it the final half in a day or two once I was home. And then at the tail end of the month I listened to the latest Singing Hills cycle book, so The Brides of High Hill. Again, unfortunately not my favourite of the series, mostly because this one is much more along the horror side of things, like gothic classic horror. It involves our cleric Chi ending up in a stately home. They escorted a young woman into the home. She's there to become the bride of the rich old man who owns the place, but not everything is as it seems. Then into June, 10 books, so kind of bang on average for me. And there was no vlogs or plans or anything dictating what I read this month. No travel or anything like that. So it is a real hodgepodge mix. Started off with a bind up of the books in the Cemeteries of Amalo series. I think there's going to be a third one coming out later this year, but this is the first 2. So Witness for the Dead and The Grief of Stones. I rated this 4 in the end, but at the beginning, God, I could have rated it 1. It was such word salad. The names, the naming conventions, the titles, the names of the places and the description of the city. It's so confusing, to the point where once I had more of a grip on things I had to go back to the first chapter and read it again because it made absolutely no sense the first time. It's a fantasy. It involves our main character Kelleher is a witness for the dead, which is part detective, part grief counsellor. He's an elf. This is a city of elves and goblins, and he can talk. He can hear the dead, so he can touch a dead body or ashes of a person and experience their last moments and what they were thinking. And so that's how he settles disputes about probate or wills or information that the dead person was holding back that they shouldn't have, but also figure out who killed someone. Then I read The Golden Voice. This is an interesting graphic novel because it's about a Cambodian rock and roll singer who was rising to prominence just as the Khmer Rouge was starting to come in and take power. Well, actually, she saw the end of the monarchy and then the beginning of the communist regime. What's interesting about this is the book comes with an audio playlist of her music, so at certain points throughout the book it tells you play track 5, so you can actually hear restored archive recordings of her music, which is really cool. Added a bit of extra depth to the story, and if you know anything about Cambodian history at this point, you'll be able to guess what happened to her, unfortunately. Then I read something that I'm not even sure counts as a book. It was more of a game. It was called, there's a series of books called Adventure Comics. This one's called Leviathan. And it's almost like a printed version of an old school dungeon crawler game. So you have to go through and turn to certain pages and answer questions and follow a flowchart of choices, and that tells you to go to a different page in the book and you're flipping backwards and forth, all in order to help a guy who needs to get a magic wand. Then I finally finished Consider Phlebas from the first book of the Culture series. I'm glad I waited for the audiobook for this because otherwise I would not have known how to pronounce most of the names in this book. As you know, any sci-fi space opera. It's apparently not the best book in the series. Lots of people say the second book is better, but I really enjoyed it. It's set far in the future. Technology has advanced so far that there are AIs which are practically sentient, and the culture is a dominant culture throughout the galaxies that works very closely with these AIs that they call brains. And Consider Phlebas is set within a war that spans a long time between the culture and another alien species called Idirans. And so one is like pro-technology and one is anti-technology, so they're clashing over that. And then Consider Phlebas, it follows a shapeshifter who is working for one side and has to like sneak onto a planet to try and get one of these brains that's ended up in the planet through a series of events. Then I've marked The Prophet as read, but honestly I haven't finished it. But it's kind of the book you don't read from cover to cover, you just dip in and out occasionally because it's very philosophical. It's just very short chapters, each dealing with kind of a different topic or question. So I'll just read that in dribs and drabs. Then another Adrian Tchaikovsky, so Dogs of War. This is a sci-fi about future conflicts where essentially like cyborg animals are used as weapons. The book follows a particular squad of a dog, a reptile, a bear and some bees, and they work together in a conflict happening in Mexico. And through a series of events they're able to have their connection to their master and team leader severed, so they don't have to do what he says anymore, and they can start to make their own decisions and decide their own fate. Then I finally read a book from my End of the World Reading Club subscription, which I'm very behind on. This was Cold People, and another sci-fi. In this one, aliens have arrived in the skies of Earth. They don't land on the land, their ships are in the sky, and they send out a message to everyone saying, we're going to take this planet over. You have 30 days to get to Antarctica. If you're not there within time limit, you're a goner. And so the book follows several point of views, some sort of in the present timeline of everybody rushing to get to Antarctica, and some in a future where humans have been on the continent for a little while and trying to like establish themselves and all the problems they're having, because it's not the most hospitable environment, and the kind of extreme lengths that some scientists go to try and ensure that the human species survives. Next up was Paladin's Hope, so the third book in the Saint of Steel series. They're the only romantasy I've ever found that, not that I read a lot of it or give it a chance, but maybe I should because I really enjoy this series. Though honestly I could just skip over the sex scenes and I enjoy the books as much. There's 7 books planned in this series apparently, because there are 7 paladins that survived the death of their god at the very beginning of the series. So this one follows a paladin called Galen, and it's kind of a dungeon crawler adventure story. He ends up in kind of like a obstacle course, but a potentially fatal one, and it's about surviving that and then bringing the crazy man who owns the obstacle course to justice. Then more Brother Cadfael, so the Raven in the Foregate. This time it's a local priest who is found drowned in the river. He was very unpopular. He was kind of a new priest in town, taken over from like an old guy who was very compassionate and sympathetic and supportive of the local population, whereas this guy is hardline, no bending the rules, no taking into account human frailty, no deviation from like the standard customs of what the church is supposed to do, and that all comes back to bite him in the ass. Cadfael has to figure out, did he die of an accident or natural causes or murder, because you know there were quite a few people who wanted to murder him. And then final book for the month was Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn. I haven't rated this one yet on my slides or on Storygraph, because the problem is I've watched the TV show and I really enjoyed it, but it does mean that there was no whodunit element for me when reading the book, because it's such a strong story that it would be pretty hard to forget whodunit. But the overall plot is that a journalist goes back to a small hometown in the Midwest, I want to say, of America, because there's been a series of killings of young girls, and so she has to investigate, and it's all very dark and horrible, as Gillian Flynn's books often are, with messy characters. Sometimes that's what you want. I can't help but feel I would have enjoyed it more if I hadn't seen the show, because then there'd be more of a shock factor to me. And then one DNF in the quarter, which I officially marked as DNF in June, which was 18 Tiny Deaths. This was a non-fiction about a forensic scientist who made these little miniature figurine models of crime scenes. Unfortunately, the book was just not as interesting as I thought it would be. A lot of it was about her early life, like her childhood. Her father was very successful in business, and so she never actually really had to work herself because she inherited so much wealth. And so a lot of the book was about that very privileged childhood, to the point where they're talking about like the architecture of the, you know, the this and that house, there are multiple houses, and you know, her mother's book club and her childhood escapades. And it's just like, no, it's not what I wanted this book to be. It's not what I was expecting from the book. It's not what I wanted. I wanted to know more about the miniatures, but reading the reviews I realised that the reason they don't really talk about the miniatures is these are still used as training tools for detectives and forensic scientists, so they can't describe it too accurately, and they definitely can't give like the solution of the crime, the mystery or the crime that took place in these scenes, because that's what the students have to do. They have to investigate. They can't like write down the answers anywhere. There is one that there's an answer online. It's kind of an exemplar, but the rest of them, they're secrets, so that trainee detectives can learn how to look at a scene. So in statistics and summaries, 27 books this quarter. My goal is 100 for the year. I think I'm like bang on track to hit 100. 4 of them were non-fiction. My TBR is sitting at 291. Let's not talk about that. My average rating for the month was 3.85. I'm happy with that. I think it's better than last quarter. And I spent £431. And so of those 27 books, 2 were borrowed from the library. 9 of them I bought this year and read during this quarter. And then 16 of them came from my existing backlist TBR. I'm happy with that. Like roughly 60% getting through my older TBR. I think it's a good balance. Of the authors, 2 were debuts. And then it's pretty much almost an even split between new to me and authors I'd read before. So it's like 12 and 13. I think that's a good balance, particularly with such a high average rating. I think it's worked out quite well. And then in terms of format, no digital books this quarter. 7 purely audiobooks, mostly during that audiobook week. 9 just physical, probably mostly through Juby's readathon. And then 11 mixed, my preferred format. When you were listening to me going over the descriptions, you might well have thought that sci-fi would be the highest genre this quarter, but actually no. Fantasy and sci-fi were both 6 each, and then mystery was 8. I think bumped up by, so I put the Gillian Flynn in that category because even though it's a thriller, it's like mystery thriller. Most of the non-fictions were memoirs, as is often the case with me. And in terms of some challenges and reading goals I've got for the year, just a little update. So I read 2 international books this quarter. So Kundo Wakes Up is set in Bangladesh and the author is Bangladeshi. And then The Golden Voice, obviously about a Cambodian singer. In terms of my 40 before 40, I'm not keeping a running total of this because I kind of want to make a wrap-up video at the very end, summarising the whole challenge. So I can't remember how many I read last quarter. I feel like it was about 2 or 3. So 5 this time. I am including DNFs as being like progress through the reading list, because if the book was on the list and I made some decision around it, then I count that as an achievement. Actually, I can't remember what categories all these were in. I think Consider Phlebas was a personal recommendation. Was The Prophet a classic? Kundo Wakes Up was the last in a series. Why Fish Don't Exist, was that just because I've had it on my TBR for so long because it came from Life's Library? I can't remember why 18 Tiny Deaths is on there. Maybe just because it's non-fiction? Did I have a general non-fiction category? I don't remember. But that's kind of a good thing, because then my reactions during the wrap-up video will be honest. In terms of my favourites for the quarter, that's going to be, so it's between Paladin's Hope, Dogs of War, which tugged on my heartstrings to get some final points at the end, and Fool's Fate. Those are my 3 5 stars for the quarter. And my favourite of those 3? It's hard to judge because I read Dogs of War and Paladin's Hope much more recently. Like in my pea brain, they're much fresher than Fool's Fate. I mean, I am a sucker for an animal story, so. But 3 books into the Saint of Steel series, like the characters are like, oh, they're so sweet. And T. Kingfisher is quickly becoming one of my all-time favourite authors. I ordered a bunch more of her books because my library doesn't have them. But then Adrian Tchaikovsky is also and Robin Hobb. What am I talking about? They're all 3 of them are favourite authors. That's not helping me narrow things down. If you absolutely made me choose, I think I'd say Paladin's Hope as my top book of the quarter. There we go. It's official now. Let's stick with it. And yeah, by every metric, this was a good quarter. Good average rating, didn't spend a horrendous amount of money, bang on track for overall reading numbers for the year, but also like some of my challenges. Only metric that's not great is the TBR number is still high, and that's, you know, I have no one to blame but myself and my spending habits. Thanks very much for joining me. I hope you also had a good reading month or quarter, or however you like to, whichever chunks of time you like to review things in. Let me know down below what was your favourite book that you read in April, May or June, and why it was your favourite. I almost certainly won't read it, but it's still interesting to see what people say. And of course, if it's a book that's already on my TBR, then you might be bumping it up to the top of the list for me. As we head into July, I'm actually doing a whole month-long reading challenge for myself around reading books with an environmental focus or theme, because I'm also really going to try and do plastic-free July. So goodness knows how that will go. For the sake of not ending up with a video that's many hours long, I'll probably split it mid-month, and you'll see me struggle. Or maybe I should be more positive. It will all be fine. It'll be so great and easy. And I will be surpassing my non-fiction goals for the year. My non-fiction goal is actually 12 books for the whole year. What did I say? 4 this month? Oh, surpassing my quarterly requirements. All right, thanks very much for joining me, and I hope you have a lovely summer through July and August. Or winter if you're in the southern hemisphere. What am I on about? All right, thanks very much. Bye.